Just a few hours after meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, Pope Francis has unexpectedly passed away. In this emotional and stunning video, J.D. Vance opens up about their confidential conversation behind the sacred walls of the Vatican. What was said between them has left even the studio panel in disbelief. Was it a prophecy, a warning, or something much deeper? It was just past 7 a.m. when the news broke. Pope Francis had passed away peacefully, they said, sometime in the early morning. But that word peacefully didn't feel right to Vice President J.D. Vance. Only 12 hours earlier, he had been inside the Vatican, inside those ancient walls, inside the private papal study, just the two of them. And what Pope Francis said in that room still shook J.D. to his core. Now, as the media scrambled to confirm the story and black flags began to rise over St. Peter's Basilica, J.D. sat in a cold TV studio, silent. The panel expected him to speak, but how could he? How do you explain a prophecy? How do you share something that sounds almost unbelievable? The host leaned forward. Mr. Vice President, were you with him yesterday? J.D. blinked. He nodded slowly. And did he say anything that might help us understand? J.D. turned to the camera. His eyes glistened. I believe Pope Francis knew he was going to die. A long pause. And he told me something. Something I can never forget. J.D. stared at the subway camera. He didn't seem sick, he said softly. His spirit was strong. His words were even stronger. Inside the Vatican, just after Easter Mass, J.D. Vance had been ushered into the papal library, a grand, echoing room filled with ancient books and secrets. Pope Francis smiled when he saw him, but it wasn't a smile of celebration. It was quiet, knowing, almost sad. He had waved away the guards, told the translator to leave, and then, in broken English, he had said it himself. I prayed last night. God spoke to me in the silence. You, J.D., you'll be the one to carry it. Carry what, Your Holiness? J.D. had asked. The Pope stood and placed his frail hand on J.D.'s chest. Truth, not just for America, but for the world. J.D. was stunned and barely responded. He thought it was symbolic, a spiritual blessing. Now, just hours later, the Pope was gone, and those words rang louder than church bells in his mind. The panel sat frozen. No one interrupted. Did he tell you more? The host whispered. J.D. nodded once. He did, but I don't know if I should say it. J.D. hesitated, then slowly reached into his suit jacket. From the inner lining, he pulled out a folded envelope. Old, yellowed paper, sealed with wax. He held it up. He gave me this right before I left, told me not to open it until morning. The room went silent. When I found out he'd passed, J.D. paused. I opened it. The camera zoomed in. His hands shook as he unfolded the letter. It's handwritten, and it's not just for me. It's for everyone. He cleared his throat and read aloud. If you are reading this, then I am gone. Do not grieve. Instead, listen carefully and share this truth before the sun sets again. The studio host gasped quietly. Even the makeup artist off camera had stopped working. J.D. looked up, his voice cracking. The world is about to face a darkness, not from bombs or war, but from forgetting who we are. He looked directly into the lens and said, We have one day to remind the world. The letter dropped to his lap and J.D. whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this alone. J.D. Vance sat still, the letter trembling in his hands. The studio lights felt hotter now. Everyone waited, but no one spoke. Then J.D. began, again. There's something I didn't tell you. He looked to his left. After he gave me the letter, Pope Francis asked me to walk with him. No press, no guards. The two men had stepped out behind the Vatican gardens. The sky was orange with the fading Easter sun. Francis walked slowly, leaning on his cane, eyes distant. He stopped beneath a statue of St. Peter, turned to J.D., and whispered something that still echoed in the vice president's soul. The weight of truth, he said, is not heavy because it's complicated. It's heavy because it's ignored. J.D. had nodded, unsure what to say. You must speak when I cannot, the Pope continued, not to gain power but to save what's left of the light. The words didn't make sense then, but now, with the Pope gone, they cut deeper than anything JD had ever heard. He looked into the Mar Cura. Whatever he meant, I have to speak it, even if it breaks me. The room was quiet. JD Vance wiped his face. I haven't cried in years, he admitted, but when I saw the Vatican doors close this morning and realized he was gone, I wept like a child. It wasn't just the loss. It was the feeling like the world had lost something eternal. He hadn't slept since the call came. He had flown straight to the studio from Rome. No press conference, no speechwriters, just this moment. He folded the letter back into its envelope. There's a part of the letter I haven't read out loud yet, he said. The host sat forward. JD hesitated, then unfolded the page again and read. JD, I'm not afraid to die. I've seen the soul of this world. It's sick, not from hate, but from silence. The kind that grows when good men say nothing. The paper trembled. They won't believe you, not at first, but when they cry, they'll understand. JD looked into the lens. And I think that's what he wanted. For the world to cry, not out of fear, but out of love. A single tear dropped from his chin. It hit the floor and even the cameraman sniffled. The studio was never meant for this kind of silence. The host, known for fiery political debates, had his eyes fixed on the table. The woman beside him reached for tissues. One of the producers off camera whispered, "Cut to break," but no one moved. JD Vance leaned forward. You asked what he told me. You wanted the headline, the secret. He tapped the envelope softly. It's not a conspiracy. It's not politics. He lifted his hand to his heart. It's this. He paused. I asked him, Holy Father, what should I do? When I go back home, JD's voice cracked. And he said, find the forgotten, touch their hands, look in their eyes, remind them they are seen. JD closed his eyes because when the world stops seeing people, the soul begins to die. The panel was crying now, not just quiet tears, but real heavy sobs. This isn't a political message, JD said softly. It's a human one. And the world needs to feel again. The host finally spoke. Mr. Vice President, thank you. But JD just whispered, no, thank him. Back in the studio, a producer whispered something into the host's earpiece. He looked at JD Vance. Mr. Vice President, there's something we need to show you. The screen behind them lit up. It's from the Vatican security team, a camera picked. This up yesterday just after you left the Pope's study. JD turned slowly toward the screen. It was grainy black and white footage. There stood Pope Francis alone in his office, staring out the window. Then, unexpectedly, he dropped to his knees. He didn't fall. He chose to kneel. His lips moved, in prayer. But then came the most shocking part. He pulled something from his breast pocket, a photo, worn and creased. JD gasped. It was a picture he had given the Pope during their visit. A small photo of a struggling family JD had met. In Appalachia, holding hands outside a church with a broken roof, the Pope held it to his chest, eyes closed, whispering something in Latin. Then the screen cut to black. JD was frozen. He prayed for them, he said, not for himself. Even the technicians stopped moving. The weight in the room became unbearable. JD Vance sat back in his chair, struggling to breathe evenly. I wasn't going to say this part, he murmured. The host leaned forward, urging him gently, You're safe here. Speak. JD swallowed hard. Before I left, the Pope told me there were things he hadn't told the cardinals, things he'd only tell one man. He looked down and chose me. Gasps rippled across the panel. JD opened the envelope again and revealed a second slip of paper, folded so tightly it looked untouched. He said this note wasn't for the church, JD continued. It was for a country. My country. He opened it and read slowly. In your land, people are not starving for food. They are starving for meaning. They run, but they don't know why. They shout, but forget how to listen. JD's voice trembled. Tell them the soul of a nation dies, not with war, but when its people forget how to love. The panel fell completely silent again. A woman off stage wept softly into her sweater sleeve. JD whispered, "This wasn't a political message. It was a dying man's final plea." Just as JD finished reading, a studio assistant rushed onto the set with a note. The host read it, turned, pale, and looked up. "It's from the Vatican. They want to speak with you now." JD stood. He took the call just off camera. The room watched every second. "Vice President Vance," the voice on the other end asked. "I'm here." Before His Holiness passed, he gave us a code, one word. He said it would confirm whether someone had spoken to him directly about the final message. JD's voice was shaking. "What word?" the Vatican official replied. "No, you must say it." JD paused. Then he closed his eyes and said softly, "Bethany." A silence. Then the voice replied, "God help us. He told you everything." JD dropped the phone to his side, overwhelmed. The host approached carefully. "What does that mean?" JD turned to the camera. "It means I've been trusted with a message, not just for America, but for the world." His hands trembled. "I don't know if I'm worthy, but I know I can't stay silent anymore." JD returned to his seat, the weight of the Vatican call still pressed heavy on his shoulders. "I wasn't ready for any of this," he said quietly, "but he knew I would come. He even had a story ready for me about a little boy." JD took a deep breath. He said the boy was poor. He had no shoes, no books, and slept on cold floors in a village few people knew existed. But every morning he walked miles just to sit outside a church and listen to the choir sing. JD paused. One day, a priest asked the boy, "Why do you come here when no one invites you in?" And the boy said, "Because when they sing, I feel like God sees me." The studio panel was quiet again. Pope Francis had looked at JD with tears in his eyes and whispered, "That boy is in every country, every race, every forgotten heart. You must be their voice, JD." JD looked to the panel, voice cracking. "I thought he was speaking in metaphors." He gripped the letter tighter. "But now I think he saw the world unraveling and he was begging us not to turn away." JD, Vance stared into the camera, his voice trembling but clear. "The Pope told me, the world doesn't collapse when bombs fall. It collapses when hearts go quiet." He leaned forward and then asked me a question I'll never forget. "JD, do you know the sound of a soul giving up?" The studio fell still. "I didn't know how to answer," JD said. "But now I think it sounds like silence. A silence we see in empty churches, abandoned homes, eyes with no hope." He gripped the arms of his chair, holding back tears. He said, "The world is full of noise, anger, fighting, distraction. But behind all of it, there's a deafening silence, growing because we've stopped really seeing each other." The host's lips were trembling. One of the crew members behind the camera quietly wiped his eyes. "And he told me," JD continued, "that if even one leader speaks with love, not politics, not ego, just love, it could break that silence." He looked down at the Pope's note again. "If they cry," he wrote, "they will begin to feel again. And if they feel again, they will find God again." The cameras kept rolling. No one dared call for a break. JD took a sip of water. His hands were shaking. "Before I left, he handed me something else," he said softly. "Something I've kept in my pocket all day." He reached into his coat and slowly pulled out a small wooden cross, hand-carved, the edges worn smooth by decades of touch. He said it was given to him by a prisoner, an innocent man who spent 20 years behind bars. JD ran his thumb along the edge. "This cross," the Pope told him, "reminds me that pain can purify, not destroy, if we don't lose sight of the one who walks with us." JD lifted the cross. "He told me to carry it and give it away when the world needed it most." Suddenly, the studio lights flickered. A strange hush swept the room. Even the air felt heavier. "I don't know if that moment is now," JD whispered. "But I do know this." He held up the cross for everyone watching. This isn't just about faith. It's about not letting love be buried with him. For a moment, even the lights held still, as if heaven was listening. JD's voice softened. There's something else I haven't shared. He looked around the studio. Everyone leaned in. After our meeting, I passed through the Sistine Chapel on my way out. A children's choir was scheduled to sing. They were already seated, dressed in white, robes waiting for the Pope to arrive. JD paused, eyes distant. But the Pope never came and the choir never sang. The image haunted him. Rows of innocent children with open mouths, silent. The Vatican official whispered, "He's too tired today." JD now realized it was more than tiredness. Something deeper had started. The silence of those children, he said slowly, was louder than anything I've ever heard. The studio lights dimmed again. Just a little. Or maybe it just felt that way. He wanted to hear one last song, but he gave that moment up to talk to me. JD's voice cracked. What kind of man gives up music to pass on a burden? No one answered. No one could. But in that moment, the world seemed a little quieter. Just enough for tears to fall. As JD reached into his coat again, the studio watched with quiet reverence. I wasn't supposed to take this, he whispered. But a nun at the side altar insisted. He pulled out a small candle, white, half-burnt, marked with the Vatican seal. She told me Pope Francis lit this after our meeting and left it burning all night. JD held it up carefully. She said, he never does that. Not for political visitors, not even for heads of state. He turned the candle in his fingers. He told her, this one's different. He will carry the fire. The words settled into the room like ash. JD placed the candle gently on the table in front of him. You have to understand, I'm just a kid from Ohio, a father, a husband. I've made mistakes. But he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. His voice cracked. And now he's gone. Tears fell again. This time, JD didn't stop them. I don't want to be the one to carry it, he said softly. But now I have no choice. And in the flicker of that small sacred candle, the world suddenly felt a little closer. The host, visibly shaken, finally asked, Mr. Vice President, what do you believe he saw coming? JD didn't answer right away. He looked directly into the lens. He saw us coming. Not a storm, not a war. Us. He unfolded the final part of the note. The world is tired, not from work, but from pretending. We pretend we're okay. We pretend we're strong. We pretend we don't need each other. JD looked at the audience through the screen. Tell the ones who hide their tears, they are not weak. They are not forgotten. They are my priority. JD placed the letter flat on the table, his voice now a whisper. He wanted this to be read not in churches but in living rooms, on broken phones in quiet bedrooms. He looked up because that's where people are hurting most. Not in the streets, but in silence. A gentle sniffle was heard from the control room. The host had no more questions. JD folded the letter one last time. If you're watching this, and you've, ever felt invisible, he said gently, the Pope lit this for you. As JD sat in the studio, his phone buzzed in his pocket again and again. He finally glanced at it. Unknown number. Rome. He answered quietly, stepping away from the camera for a moment. A woman's voice, trembling. Mr. Vance, I'm Sister Isabella. I was with him in his final hour. JD's throat tightened. Was he in pain? No, she whispered. He was calm, almost radiant, but he kept asking for one thing. Has JD read the message yet? JD froze. He said he must tell the truth before the sun sets, before the world goes blind in the dark. JD looked out the studio window. The sky was beginning to change. Evening was creeping in. Did he say anything else? JD asked, desperate for more. There was a pause. Then the sister added gently, He said the world would cry. Not because he's gone, but because they finally heard him. JD hung up slowly, and when he returned to his seat, his eyes told the panel one thing. This wasn't just a story. This was a mission. JD placed the small letter on the table again. His hands trembled as he unfolded it one final time. "I need to read the last part," he said softly. The panel nodded silently. JD's voice wavered as he began. "And when they ask who I was, do not call me a pope. Tell them I was a servant." A voice in the hallway, a candle in a very dark room. He paused to wipe his eyes. "Tell them I love them. Even the forgotten, even the broken, especially the ones who never thought they mattered." The room was quiet. Even the broadcast feed had paused its scrolling ticker. The entire network had frozen the screen on JD's face, tears streaming down, hands resting on that candle and cross. "I don't know how to say goodbye to him," JD said. "But he didn't want us to say goodbye. He wanted us to wake up." He folded the letter again, slower this time. He saw a world drifting toward numbness, and he used his last breath to remind us how to feel. Then JD looked directly into the camera. If you've ever wondered if your life matters, it does. He died believing that. A hush fell across the studio as the sun outside began to dip lower. JD stood slowly. "I want to end this not as a politician, but as a man who was changed forever in a single room." He picked up the candle. He held the cross close to his heart. Then he stepped forward toward the lens, as if speaking directly into the homes of everyone watching. He told me this wasn't for headlines. This was for the hearts of the world. He breathed in deeply. "We don't need more noise. We need more truth. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in how we treat strangers, in how we hold our families, in how we forgive." He blinked back tears. "I don't know why he trusted me, but I promise you, I won't waste this." A long pause. "Before this day ends, I want you to do one thing. Call someone you love. Tell them they matter." He looked to the candle once more. "And if you're crying right now, it means the world is still alive." The screen faded to black. The camera returned from black, fading into JD Vance still standing at center stage. The candle flickered beside him, but something had changed. The chair next to him, the one reserved for special guests, was now empty. "I asked the producers to leave it there," JD said softly. "That was supposed to be a seat." He looked at it for a long moment. I imagined him sitting here, smiling gently, listening, maybe even correcting me when I got the words wrong. JD chuckled quietly through tears. "But now that chair will never be filled." He turned to the panel. "And isn't that how so many people feel right now? Like something they needed, someone they counted on, is just gone?" He touched the back of the chair, but he told me before I left that when he was gone, his voice wouldn't be in a room. It would be in the echoes. JD looked into the camera again. "You'll hear him in the cries of children, in the silence of the lonely, in every act of kindness done with no audience." The panel was speechless because somehow the empty chair didn't feel empty anymore. As the candle's flame danced gently, JD took a breath and turned to a quiet corner of the studio. "There's one more story I haven't told," he said. "It happened yesterday, right before I left the Vatican. A man with a camera, one of the Pope's personal photographers, tapped me on the shoulder." JD mimicked the motion. "He handed me a photo, freshly printed. He said His Holiness asked me to take this the moment you turned away after you hugged him goodbye." JD reached into his coat and unfolded the picture. The audience couldn't see it, but tears slid down his cheek as he described it. "It's me, walking away, and Pope Francis standing behind me. His hand is raised, not in farewell, but in blessing." He paused. I asked the photographer, "Why did he want this taken?" And the man replied, "Because he knew he wanted history to remember that he sent you." JD gently placed the photo beside the candle and cross. Then he whispered, "I didn't go to the Vatican for a meeting. I went for a mission." And in that moment, Millions watching at home began to cry because deep down, they believed it too. The sun outside had nearly vanished. Inside the studio, no one spoke, no music played, just silence. JD turned to the host. "I need to make a confession. Not political, not public, just personal." The host nodded slowly. JD inhaled deeply. "When I was a teenager, I stopped believing. In God, in people, in goodness." His voice cracked. "I saw too much pain, too much cruelty, and I said to myself, if God's real, where is he?" He paused. "Yesterday, inside those marble walls, I found him." JD reached for the small wooden cross again. But it wasn't in the gold. It wasn't in the history. It was in an old man's eyes. Tired but kind, wrinkled but glowing. He looked at the panel, then into the camera. And he didn't give me a sermon. He gave me a task. His voice was trembling. "Remind the world that love is real, that hope still breathes, that faith can still rise from the ashes." He placed the cross down slowly. "And so here I am, no longer doubting, no longer hiding." The Tiamat room was silent, but across the world millions cried in unison. JD Vance sat quietly for a moment, then reached for the original letter again. "I didn't notice it before," he said softly. But something was hidden inside. He gently unfolded the thick paper. Tucked into the bottom corner was a smaller sealed envelope, unmarked, untitled, only wax sealed with a cross. JD turned it over slowly. "It's addressed to someone," he whispered, "but not me." He held it up. Scrolled in fading ink were the words, "To the one who feels forgotten." The panel gasped. JD looked into the camera. He knew. Somehow he knew this would be seen by someone. Out there, someone who feels invisible, unloved, lost. He stared directly into the lens, his voice cracking. "If that's you, this is your letter." This is his voice reaching through the silence. JD placed the envelope upright next to the candle. Then he whispered, "You matter. You've always mattered. And now the Pope's final blessing rests on you." For a brief moment, even the flame seemed to lean toward the camera like heaven itself was listening. And around the world, hearts shattered open, JD wiped his face slowly. "I want to share something deeply personal now, something the Pope asked me not to say until this moment." The host leaned in, eyes wide. JD nodded gently. "He told me a story about a woman. Her name was Rosa. She was the cleaning lady at the seminary where he trained. She never asked for thanks, never complained, just swept the chapel floors and cried in silence after every mass. One day, young Jorge Mario Bergoglio, years before becoming Pope, found her praying alone. He asked why. She cried every Sunday. She said, 'Because I gave up my son for the church, he became a priest. I can't hug him or call him or tell him I miss him.'" JD paused. "The Pope told me he never forgot her tears, and he said, 'I think of her every time I meet someone who hides their pain with a smile.'" JD now turned again to the camera. "So, if you're hurting right now, smiling through the pain, carrying a story no one sees," he pointed to the sky. "He saw you, and he carried you all the way to his final breath." As the lights in the studio dimmed further, JD stood once again. "There's one final thing I need to show you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket one last time and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This isn't a letter. It's a receipt." The panel looked confused. JD continued. "After I left his study yesterday, he had one of his aides track me down at the Vatican gate. He gave me this." JD unfolded the page. A donation slip signed by Pope Francis in the amount of $25, marked for a homeless shelter in Rome. The panel gasped. He told the aide, "Make sure Vice President Vance knows. Even in death, we must give." JD looked to the crowd watching at home. "He gave me wisdom. He gave me purpose. But with his final act, he gave someone else a meal." Tears streamed down his face. He didn't want to be remembered as powerful. He wanted to be remembered as useful. Then he whispered, "We all have something to give, And his last request is that we do it before the sun sets. J.D. Vance held up a small folded paper. This was handed to me by a child just outside the Vatican gate yesterday. I didn't even get his name. He carefully unfolded it on the studio table. A crayon drawing, a stick figure of Pope Francis with arms stretched wide, standing next to a much taller man wearing a tie. Below it, written in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for saving him." The studio went still. JD's voice cracked. I didn't understand it at the time. I smiled and tucked it in my pocket. But now I think I do. He tapped the drawing gently. He didn't mean saving the Pope's life. He meant saving the Pope's words, carrying them, keeping them alive. JD looked into the camera, his eyes red, face soft. There are people out there, kids, widows, veterans, the forgotten, who just want to know someone still hears them. He lifted the drawing for the viewers at home. And yesterday, in his final hours, Pope Francis chose you. Every person watching, you were his final audience. And in homes across the world, tears flowed like rain on stone. JD's tone deepened. I need to say this exactly how he told me, because if I don't, I'll be doing him a disservice. He opened the letter again. In the margin, barely legible, were 3 words. Beauty is fading. JD looked up. He didn't mean art or music. He meant something deeper. He told me, the world has stopped recognizing beauty in people. He recalled the Pope's voice clearly, almost whispering, we admire power, we reward cruelty, we follow noise, but the kindest faces pass us by unnoticed. JD's hands trembled slightly. He said, if the world stops seeing beauty in the poor, the sick, the forgotten, it will lose sight of God altogether. The panel was quiet. One of the guests had begun quietly sobbing into her sleeve. JD continued. He wasn't warning about a war or an economy. He was warning us that our hearts are closing. He held the candle again, steadier this time. If there's still a spark in you, even the tiniest bit, let it burn for someone else. And in that moment, people watching alone felt seen, some for the first time in years. The sky outside the studio window was now deep orange. The sun had nearly set. JD stood one last time, the wooden cross in one hand, the candle in the other. He turned toward the empty chair beside him, still untouched since the start. I want to say this like he would have said it. Simply. He looked into the camera and said slowly, the world is hurting, but we don't need louder voices. We need softer hearts. He placed the candle back down. Then he added, he didn't ask me to change the world. He asked me to feel it, to see the brokenness and walk toward it, not away. JD stepped back. The candle flickered, and then, before anyone could blink, the flame went out. The studio gasped. No fan, no breeze, just a silent, holy stillness. JD lowered his head and then whispered, he's gone now, but everything he stood for lives in how we treat one another, starting tonight. The screen began to dim. Across millions of homes, people sat in silence, holding tissues, holding hands, and finally holding nothing back. The camera remained fixed on J.D. Vance, standing beside the now extinguished candle. Everyone in the studio waited for him to speak, but he didn't, not right away. Instead, he turned slowly and walked to the studio exit. The camera followed. He reached for the door and pushed it open. The fading sun poured in from the street outside, soft golden light spilling across the floor. JD stood in the glow and spoke. He told me to leave the door open. The panel watched, confused. JD explained. He said, the world keeps shutting doors between neighbors, families, faiths, nations, and we've forgotten that hearts can't breathe in locked rooms. He turned back toward the camera. And so I'm leaving this door open for you. Whoever you are, whatever you carry, whatever you've lost. He stepped aside. There's room in this story for you. And just like that, people around the world saw something in their homes they hadn't seen in years. Hope. And it came through an open door. As JD stood in the doorway, a quiet tone buzzed in his ear. The Vatican again. The host nodded, giving JD space. He pressed the earpiece in. A voice came through, gentle and reverent. Mr. Vice President, the Holy Father left behind one more message, one final sentence, handwritten, just found beneath his pillow. JD froze. His hand trembled. Can you read it to me? He whispered. To the one who listens, let your love be louder than your title. Let your silence be holy. And when the world forgets how to feel, remind them. JD closed his eyes, tears rolling freely now. That's all he wrote? He asked softly. Yes, the voice said gently. That's everything. JD lowered his head, and then he whispered something that wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, wasn't political. Your Holiness, I promise I'll remind them. The door remained open behind him. The candle stayed dark, but the world was no longer the same because someone had listened. JD returned to the center of the studio. The silence was thick with sacred weight. He took a deep breath and then, with one final motion, he reached into his pocket. A matchbox. He struck a match, and slowly, reverently relit the candle. A small flicker, then a flame. The audience watching from home saw it. The same candle Pope Francis had lit the night before he died, now burning once more. JD looked into the camera for the final time. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I don't know what battles we'll face, but I do know this. He nodded toward the flame. This light belongs to all of us. Keep it lit in your kindness, in your forgiveness, in how you speak, how you love, how you remember. The camera slowly zoomed in as JD backed away, and the flame stood still. If this story made you cry, if it made you feel something you haven't felt in a long time, then don't let the flame stop here. Like this video to carry the light. Comment below with one word that this story left in your heart. Subscribe to keep receiving real stories that matter. Share this with someone who needs to feel seen, because the world still needs love. And it starts with you. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Pope Francis, for